Right. Hey folks, so have you ever wondered how to implement high volume correctly? Or have you ever wondered how to implement low volume correctly? Well, over the course of this video series, a four-parter, I'm going to talk about how to implement both high and low volume correctly and how they can actually benefit each other. Now, I personally use both. I think they help each other. I think they're synergistic. So if you're new to the channel, you might be forgiven for trying to box me into a camp, either a high volume camp or a low volume camp. Truth is, if you look back through my history of videos on YouTube, I have rallied against poor interpretations of low volume and I've rallied against poor interpretations of high volume. However, in my own training and in my own coaching, I use both. The caveat is I use correct interpretations of both. And that's what I want to speak about today. Now, I just want to point out at this point, this video series is going to be for the more advanced. There is going to be a lot of nuance here. If you're not good with that, this is probably not for you. This is an advanced series, and it is to help people who are in that sort of high intermediate range and trying to burst through to the next level. This video, I'm mostly going to speak about the differences between high and low volume in implementation and defining volume. Over the course of the next few videos, I'm going to speak about specific implementations of the approaches, how to do it over the course of, say, a multi-year plan. And then in the final video, I might give one example of how to do this in more beginner intermediates, certainly more early intermediates, which I think can be useful. Okay. I view these things as tools in a toolbox. So first of all, I want to speak about differences in implementation. Before we get into that, this video is sponsored by Bootcamp. I am very pleased and very proud to be partnered with Bootcamp. I've been on YouTube for about 3 years now. I actually had a podcast prior to that, which you can still find on iTunes. And I was offered all the usual sponsorships, the men's grooming, the VPN kits, but I never said yes to any of those. I always had it in my mind that I would partner with somebody that I really believed in. And so Bootcamp is the one for me, and they've been great so far. If you look on the Bootcamp app, you'll see there are so far 3 free programs from me. There's a full body, there's an upper lower, and there's a bro slip. And also, just as a bit of an insider scoop for those of you who listen to the video, I've almost finished my very first premium program. So I'll be finishing it off sometime over the next few days and sending it off to Michael from Bootcamp, and we'll get it up there on the app. I will announce that when it's ready. But so you guys watching know, it is an intermediate to advanced routine. It's a good one. It will keep your interest. That's what I'll say. It'll be fun. If you're into hypertrophy, or even if you're into a bit of powerlifting, power building, you'll like it. Okay. So onwards we go. First thing I'm going to talk about is differences in implementation, because apart from just one being high volume, one being low volume, there are other differences as well. And it's important to know that, because when you're switching from one approach to another, you have to understand what levers to pull. Like, how does your routine change? Me personally, I don't like to drop exercises. The exercises stay the same for the most part anyway. However, the implementation of the routine and the sets, that changes. This is because I generally am not a fan of switching exercises very often, or even switching routines. Moving from a high volume to a low volume routine doesn't actually necessitate a change of the overall structure. You might do a low volume upper lower, and you might do a high volume upper lower with the same exercises. We're not talking fundamental changes. What we're talking about is changes to the execution of the sets and reps. Okay. Not the overall structure of the program. That's how you can provide continuity to your client, or that's how you guys can have continuity. Right. So the things that we do change, let's talk about them now. So with lower volume approaches, generally speaking, because you're doing less volume, you're going to have a longer rest periods for the most part. Now, that's for a couple of reasons. The first reason is there's just less to do in the hour or hour and a half you're at the gym. All right. Now, the second reason is each set needs to be worth more. Each set is a larger percentage of the overall stimulus for that muscle group. So you might be doing 6 to 8 sets per body part per week as a low volume kind of thing. Whereas when you're doing high volumes, it could be 14 to 16. So each set is worth twice as much as it was on a high volume approach, because you're doing half the volume. So longer rest periods mean you can put more energy and focus into that set. So that's the first thing. Low volumes generally necessitate longer rest periods. Also, Usually you're looking at big basic exercises for low volume approaches. Generally speaking, the guys who get very passionate about topics like the overhead press versus side laterals, you'll notice that they're almost always low volume advocates. They don't advocate like 15, 16, 20 sets per body part per week. So it kind of makes sense. If you are doing a low volume routine, you're probably going to want to do the big basic exercises, including the overhead press, because you're trying to get the most out of it. Whereas if you're a high volume guy, or let's say you're doing a high volume phase and you get to do 16 sets of side laterals, it works really well. So by understanding that point, the point that if you have more volume to allocate to a muscle group, you're more likely to be able to include a wider variety of exercises like side laterals. By understanding that point, congratulations, you understand nuance better than some influencers out there who are screaming to the rooftops about how overhead press is a necessary approach, but they don't realize they only think it's necessary because they are generally lower volume advocates in the grand scheme. So with a low volume approach, you're generally going to be implementing bigger basic exercises. Now, alongside that, because you're resting longer and you're doing less sets, you're probably going to be handling heavier weights for the most part. The weights will be maybe 10 to 5% heavier than they would do if you were doing more of a volume approach. You're able to do those top sets, maybe those top 1 or 2 sets per exercise. So that lends itself to going a little bit heavier. Now, due to that, the execution of your reps may be more controlled and slower in cadence. So it's all part and parcel of getting the most out of the exercise. Really emphasize the eccentric and really get the most out of everything if you're doing a low volume approach. So just to summarize, the key tenets of any low volume approach: longer rest periods. You're probably going to err on the side of big basic exercises rather than smaller isolation ones, heavier weights, and generally probably slower, more controlled execution of reps. Now, you flip that over to the high volume stuff. Generally speaking, you have the potential for shorter rest periods. You can take them if you want. Okay. Fact of the matter is, if you're trying to do double the volume, you've got to try and fit that volume in somehow. My experience has shown me that if you're doing the high volume stuff, rest periods as short as 2 minutes are generally okay for even for heavy compounds, because you're stacking the fatigue. And on that note, you're probably going to be staying further away from failure with a high volume approach. As volume goes up, intensity should come down. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. That was actually one of the major problems with Mike Israel's escalating volume approach. You're escalating two factors there, volume and intensity at the same time, which leads to a very strong stimulus, but also just a rapid approach towards potential injury. So with the high volume approach, shorter rest periods, generally speaking, you're going to probably try and keep some reps in the tank. Just think about the overall trends. But this is what I'm talking about. If you understand this point, you'll start to understand why there are differences in what you see on the YouTube space. So when you understand what I'm saying here, YouTube and Instagram become much less intimidating places, because what looks like completely contradictory information actually starts to make sense. Why is that guy saying do side laterals for high volume when the other guy is saying, no, do low volume, heavy, hard, basic overhead presses? Well, it's because they are implementing different approaches, completely fundamentally different. So what I'm trying to say here is, if you guys can follow me so far, you can understand why the approaches are different. And then we can hope to benefit from them by maybe dipping in and out of those approaches over the course of the next few years to take advantage of what they have to offer. Because as a broad general rule, you can get something from both approaches. They both offer unique advantages. And it's not just about saving time. It's more than that. I think they offer unique growth advantages. And the main thing is, I think they potentiate each other. Sometimes doing low volume tends to make you more receptive to doing high volume, which tends to make you more receptive to going back to low volume. This is what I've seen to work. Whether it's the variety, whether it's something biological going on, I don't know. I mean, if we take it back to the 70s, the Chinese and the Bulgarians would call this accumulation and intensification. Yes, that was weightlifting, but it's still the human body. There are density phases and then there are more peaking phases, and we can take advantage of both of those phases. So that is the first major part of the video. I just wanted to speak about the differences in implementation. And I want you guys to understand they're just two completely different approaches. They both have the potential to work. Now, you might argue they might work better for certain individuals. So the next thing I want to speak about is defining volume, because we've been talking about high volume, talking about low volume. The natural question would be, how do we define volume? So you might recall I did a video a couple of weeks ago now, the biggest lie in fitness. Now, that was generally very well received. Most people understood what I was trying to say. A small group of people did misunderstand and just thought I was against high volume as a rule. Now, I'm not. If you paid attention to the details of that video, the actual content, what I was rebelling against was this super high volumes, like 45 sets, 52 sets, which have been identified in studies. That's what really leaves a bad taste in my mouth. These super high volumes, they're not just recommendations, they have been made via studies, and studies which some people have argued, some people like Lyle McDonald have argued weren't done very well. That's my issue. Okay. I don't care about somebody who wants to do 20 sets per body part, even 25. Like, fine, cool. If that works for you, go for it. To get my bench press up to 140 kilos, 3 plates, I had to do 25 to 30 sets of presses per week, heavy presses. So I'm not opposed to higher volumes at all. What I was rallying against was just this super high, insane nonsense. And just this general high volume echo chamber, which I think can prevent people from seeing the benefits of low volume approaches and also can prevent beginners from actually working hard because they've got so much to do in the gym. So when I define higher volumes, I'm not talking about super high volumes. I'm also not talking about super low volume. I have rallied against hit stupidity many times. I am definitely more for sensible lower volumes, but some of the crazy hit stuff I've seen where the volumes are super low, or the old Mensa stuff where he's training a body part every sort of 10 days or 14 days, I think that's far too much. I think the greater problem right now in social media is the super high volumes. Let me speak to you a bit about what I would define then as higher and low volume. For me personally, my recommendations haven't changed. Okay. On the low end, I'm looking at about 8 sets per body part per week. On the high end, 14 to 16. That's my range. Now, let me just quickly discuss the differences between beginners, intermediates, and more advanced. So there are two main reasons for that. Two main reasons. The first is when you're a beginner, just the novelty of being in the gym is enough. You don't have to do a lot. The second reason that the beginners need low volumes is it allows them to focus on hard work. If you've got a lot of work to do, if you've got a beginner doing 20 sets per body part per week, in my experience, they have a harder time generating the intensity for 20 sets than they might do for 2 to 4 sets. If they've got less to do, they can do those sets better. And in the beginning, my entire focus is to get beginners training hard. And training hard is a skill. It's a skill which you need to practice in the first year or so of lifting. Now, it's going to be infinitely harder to do that if you're also landed with a bunch of volume. So for beginners, those two reasons, volume's on the lower side. Now, for the advanced, I would say it's highly personalized. The main priority is just staying safe. But I think for the advanced guys, my personal feeling is they can benefit from low volumes, but also this video series was going to show they can benefit from periods of high volumes as well. And that potentiates the low volume work. So with the advanced, it's a little more complicated. It's not just low volumes, although I think predominantly low volumes and periods of high volumes built in, as I will talk about over the next couple of videos. Intermediates, in my experience, benefit from the highest volumes. That's when the weights aren't heavy enough for you to really make a big impact on your body, but also you're not a beginner anymore. So you're not super sensitive to training. You need a lot of volume with the weights you can lift. So intermediates, generally volume is sky high. For me, certainly that was when my volume was the highest. So this video is full of lots of nuance. My regular viewers will understand when I have a point to make, like I'm trying to provide you with nuance, I'm trying to provide you with benefits of my experience. But I'll call it there. Hope you guys are doing great. Have a wonderful weekend. And yeah, so 3 more videos in this series. I've got a lot to talk about here, and I think it's a topic worth speaking about. So I'll catch you in the next one. All good.